Greetings to all you wonderful ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a brand new episode of Fire Emblem Battle Breakdown. I began this series by analysing the time-travelling daughter of the exiled Lucina, and today I'm travelling even further back in time to the Game Boy Advance with the first Fire Emblem game to make its way to Western Shores, Blazing Sword, as the star of today's episode is the Ostian General Hector. Debuting in Fire Emblem Binding Blade, Hector played the role of Alina's father who was swiftly defeated by Sephiel and died in Roy's arms. However, the prequel Blazing Sword told the story of himself, Lyn and Roy's father Eliwood on their quest to defeat the evil Nagal from bringing the dragons back into the world and save the young Sephiel from his vile father. Only for them to regret this decision 20 years later. I guess hindsight really is 2020. Despite having to initially compete with two other lords and all those who preceded and succeeded him, Hector has remained one of the most popular and loved characters throughout the franchise. This Ostian oaf was unique for being brash, crude, and downright boorish in his behaviour at times, while simultaneously embodying a resolve like no other and devotion to his best friend Eliwood that would put Hubert to shame, making Hector a simultaneously flawed but complex character who went on to having 5 versions and heroes at the time of this video, become one of the 4 winners during the second Choose Your Legends banner, has no shortage of fan art, and is well known amongst the community for being a badass. Though apparently not enough to make it into warriors over Lyn, it's no wonder these two bicker so much. Bitch! Hector is regularly perceived to be an absolute beast by the masses, but as always, the numbers can tell a very different story. So let's see just how Hector handles the greatest power in the Fire Emblem universe, otherwise known as math. As I set out to answer the question, is Hector worth using? In today's episode of Fire Emblem Battle Breakdown. And in today's video, I shall be covering Hector's appearance in Fire Emblem Blazing Sword and Heroes. I will not be addressing Binding Blade as Hector can only be featured during the trial maps, and I'm also not counting the Awakening Spot Pass feature. In the continent of Alive, Ostia is known for having impenetrable defences and boasts the largest military force in Lycia, with the Marquis Hector himself wielding an axe to symbolise his brute strength. If you were to ask the average Fire Emblem fan how good Hector is, chances are they would respond by claiming he is incredible and hands down the best lord in FE7, which to be fair, he is without a doubt the best lord in Blazing Sword. However, that's not something to be proud of, as Lyn and Eliwood are both objectively bad units. Heck, it's been unearthed that Lyn's the worst lord in the series thus far, and as such, Hector's reputation in this particular context is relatively overblown. As though I would never declare that he is a bad unit, a good one is taking things a little far statistically speaking, so I made the argument that he is overall okay, and mid-tier at best. That being said, it's definitely easy to see why so many would be led to believe he's amazing. Hailing from Ostia, Hector is built like an armor unit, with a base stat total of 46 not counting move and constitution, which is higher than Lyn's total of 43 and only 1 point lower than Eliwood's 47. Defense and constitution are his strongest stats, being 8 and 13 respectively, but strength is good too at 7, and upon beginning his journey or joining Eliwood's side, he can more than hold his own against most if not all the adversaries, as well as often being the ideal boss killer for a good number of chapters. Hector's speed being 5 is okay, as it is enough to not get doubled, which is something any armor unit should be grateful for. But despite his high defense, his initial HP threshold, I must admit, isn't very impressive, only having 19 points, which is the 3rd lowest upon joining his best friend's side, so until this growth kick in, you might want to be a little cautious. Hector's brash nature extends beyond his personality, as Hector's skill and luck are poor, which results in initial accuracy issues alongside wielding axes that are plagued with naturally low hit rates. Thankfully, Hector gains many weapon advantages throughout the game due to the multitude of lance-based enemies, which can somewhat mitigate his lack of perception. However, I would highly recommend not trying to engage enemies that are taking refuge in some sort of terrain unless the numbers are significantly in your favour, otherwise Hector won't be able to hit the broadside of a barn. Finally, Hector has 5 movement, which is standard but not ideal, and 0 resistance, which for a while isn't a problem, as there are next to no magic enemies in the early game, but later down the line it may bite him in the ass. That being said, because of his high strength, it's not uncommon for Hector to behead those bookworms with a hand axe.
Later, bitch! The fuck off my screen!
In summary, Hector's bases work fine, but aren't quite enough to perform as the powerhouse he's often cited to be, which is precisely where his growths kick in, as they are remarkably good for his class line, having excellent HP at 90%, which is his best growth, and if you don't count Merlin as, himself, Osmond and Lowen have the highest HP growth in the entire game. Hector also ascertains good strength at 60%, along with solid skill and defense at 45 and 50% respectively. His remaining growths I would not claim to be bad, as the lowest he'll go is resistance at 25%, so I deliberate Hector to be a considerable long-term investment. Plus, no matter the pathway, he has high availability for his percentages to capitalize on. Additionally, Hector excels significantly in the early game because of his bulk and weapon type, so depending on how much you should get out of him during the initial chapters, his numbers may quickly start to skyrocket, but in the case of FE7 and most Fire Emblem games, bases matter more than growth, so bear that in mind. Once Hector receives a Heaven Seal, he can promote into a Great Lord. But truth be told, Hector's promotion bonuses are found to be rather disappointing, as he gains no additional strength and only 1 point in defense. However, they do help to offset some of his weaker stats with an impressive +5 resistance boost. Unfortunately, the lack of additional movement, in conjunction to only getting swords at D level, while admittedly fixing Hector's hit rate issues to an extent, are a bad choice of weapon to wield in Blazing Sword due to the multitude of lance-based enemies and the lack of reliable 1-2 range attacks, hurting Hector's longevity. Due to Blazing Sword's option to have one of 3 lords as the focus of the story, Hector can promote during chapter 24 of Lyn/Eliwood mode at the earliest, which is still a bit late all things considered, but better than Hector mode where his coronation is fixed until the end of chapter 29. However, the benefit of waiting this long to promote the axe-wielding idiot is that Hector mode is the only way to enable Eliwood to promote early, and while yes, Eliwood is not a good unit and worse than Hector in general, he does benefit from promotion the most out of the 3 by far. Since Constitution is Hector's highest value outside of HP and is boosted to 15 upon promotion, once he can sheath a sword, not a single blade in FE7 will weigh him down aside from Durandal, which he cannot even use. This unfortunately acts as a double-edged sword, as Hector's high con cost makes it difficult for allies to safely rescue and transport him without being significantly weighed down, which can be problematic during ranked runs. Just be grateful he isn't a fat fuck. Hector regrettably does not have the best stat caps, as though his strength and defense can reach a maximum of 30 and 29 respectively, which is very impressive, Hector's speed and skill cannot go above 24, and his resistance cap cannot exceed 20, which in the endgame will more than likely hit him hard given the 2 final bosses. Hector will on average not cap any of his stats as either a normal or promoted unit, though as a level 20 Great Lord, HP, strength and defense will be very close to being maxed out. An interesting piece of information I discovered is that when wielding the legendary weapon Armad, Hector must have a minimum of 22 speed in order to double the dragon boss and 23 on Hector hard mode due to being weighed down by 3 points without a body ring, with the speed formula in Blazing Sword acting as follows. Speed minus the combination of constitution minus weapon weight. If the unit's constitution is higher than the weapon's weight, then the penalty is 0, along with needing a total stat value to equal or be 4 points greater than the target speed. Since the Dragon Boss has 15 speed on normal mode and 16 on hard mode, he must have a minimum of 19/20 speed respectively when all factors are taken into account. Hector begins his journey axe-locked, which for Blazing Sword is somewhat ideal, given that the majority of enemies are lance-based, and in the early game specifically, Hector can regularly function as one of the team's better units due to his bulk, damage output, and regular weapon advantage. Even more so on Hector hard mode, which is a significant increase to the number of Pegasus Knights and Archers, which he and Oswin absolutely laugh at. However, remaining footlocked is a permanent problem that becomes much more apparent once the team is larger and comprised of promoted units. Hector has a strong starting axe rank at sea level, allowing him to utilize all but 4 axes not counting Armad. On Hector mode, he brings along a hand axe for ranged utility, plus his personal weapon Wolfbeil is very potent with a high base attack of 10 while not being weighed down, and more importantly, is super effective against armor/horseback units. In the case of FE7 and 9, super effective attacks only deal double damage instead of the usual triple, and thus didn't make much of a difference, which really ended up fucking archers in the ass, as a Silver Lance will deal the same damage to a mounted unit as a Horse Slayer, but when taking into account Hector's strength along with the might of Wolfbeil, Hector can sometimes one-shot cavaliers and deal an impressive amount of damage to even the toughest of armor units. While the Wolfbeil is brilliant, Hector's ultimate treasure is the Thunder Axe Armad, which despite receiving it pretty damn late into the game, grants him +5 defense and is super effective against dragons, making him exceedingly tanky, and it has the same strength as the Devil Axe, with the highest hit rate of all the axes at 85%, though ironically, Basilikos deals 4 more base damage against regular enemies. Hector's affinity for axes is reflected through the fact that only 7 of these weapons weigh him down at base, which is reduced to just 3 when promoted, granting him a significant advantage against enemies, and despite not having the best speed, many of Blazing Sword's foes are notorious for being slow and having poor constitution, so he shouldn't have trouble running circles around them.
I don't usually kill morons this fast.
So far, Hector has demonstrated proficient performance on average, but he can further increase his effectiveness when supporting his compatriots, as Hector embodies Thunder affinity and can make exchanges with the following units: Eliwood, Foreigner, and Oswin for Amina bonuses, Lyn and Matthew for Wind affinity, Florina to act as a light support boost, and finally Sarah, who shares Thunder with Hector. Anima supports primarily boost defense, evasion, and critical evasion, with a slight attack and critical buff, which can make units better regular and dodge tanked, though dodge tanking should never be considered a sound strategy, and considering one of these choices is Oswin, both of them are bulky enough that dodging becomes fundamentally irrelevant, though Eliwood and Foreigner are better suited to these boosts. Wind affinity focuses on increasing critical hit and critical evade, with minor escalation to attack, defense, evasion, and hit. Though 4 of the 6 stat boosts are minor, these supports allow both parties to gain buffs to all areas, which is useful in its own right. However, the increased critical works surprisingly well for Lyn and Matthew, given their low strength and higher than normal crit rates, but critical hits are never reliable and both units aren't effective fighters in general. Light Affinity boosts all stats, but pertains the most affinity in regards to critical and defense, which in my personal opinion is the best support affinity for Hector, as outside of getting a buff to all areas, the increased defense and critical will aid him in his performance as the team's tank, plus his hit rate will increase by 7%. In addition, Florina greatly appreciates the greater degree of defense. It's like these two are made for each other. Sarah is Hector's only support partner to share their friend affinity, which makes sense given how obnoxious both of them can be, which inflates defense, evasion, critical, and critical evade. As mentioned previously, evade doesn't matter too much to Hector, however the additional defense and critical are nice, but Florina's support provides all that and more, and while Sarah does benefit from bigger bulk, she won't be fighting any adversaries until she promotes, and should not be in any physical unit's line of fire whatsoever, so I maintain that this is ultimately wasted on her. All things considered, achieving an A support with Florina and then B with either Lyn or Matthew I theorize to be the ideal course of action for both parties. However, though Anima is the weakest choice, Hector can build support levels with Eliwood very quickly for some immediate bonuses. In general, Hector has the benefit of being a powerhouse on normal mode and is most certainly useful in the early stages of hard mode. However, from chapter 22 onwards, Hector starts to fall off fast, especially in his own campaign, by being forced to deploy in each map, and unfortunately unable to go any further than level 20 until the end of chapter 29. Additionally, magic and staff users become much more prominent in the second half of the game, with Falconers in particular being some of the fastest enemies in Epi 7 because when observing stat averages, 18 speed is no joke. Plus, bosses like Sonya, Ursula and Limstella can be Hector's kryptonite, and it's common for him at this point to play the part of Roy by doing nothing for a while until promotion, resulting in what I'd argue to be a mixed bag. Though for the record, even an unpromoted Hector can be a good unit to engage Wyvern Riders. When pitted against his fellow lords, Hector is the strongest on the grounds of stat and growth spread that allows him to function more reliably in regards to dealing significant damage and tanking a barrage of attacks, without having to rely on dodges or getting criticals to secure kills. Both Eliwood and Lyn will on average have better speed, res and skill, but their lack of 1-2 range before promotion and being sword locked gives Hector a serious edge over them. Heck, Lyn never gets a proper 1-2 range weapon aside from the light brand, unless you count the Wind Sword via Game Boy Link and the Root Sword which is exclusive to Hector mode. Good lord, you really are awful! In addition, the Sword Lords have more units to compete with compared to Hector, and thus they become primarily pointless, though Eliwood is a slight exception only after promotion due to gaining a mount and lancers, but by then it might already be too late to salvage him. In regards to regular competition, his immediate opposition comes in the form of Dorcas and Barter. Yes, Marcus can wield axes too, but Marcus is better than everyone, so that's not fair. And stat-wise, Hector has equal or worse numbers across the board compared to Dorcas, not counting defense, and an even degree of difference when matched against Barter, though HP is where both will outshine him starting out, and they all have 0 resistance. By level 10, Hector should have seen a tremendous improvement even with the inclusion of Dart. On average, his HP will remain the lowest, but his defense will be double that of Barter and Dart, and triple of what Dorcas has, in addition to the joint second highest speed and luck, along with the equally highest res while having the second best strength and skill. This will continue throughout the game, where as a level 20 base unit, Hector's HP hasn't moved from the bottom, but now his strength will be tied for second place with Barter, and only 1 point behind Dart's. He'll have the second best skill next to Dorcas, second best speed next to Dart, second best luck next to Barter and Dorcas, and easily the best defense at 17, which is almost double that of Barter and more than double that of Dorcas and Dart. So the lack of HP at this point isn't much of an issue in a fist fight.
I can do this all day.
As soon as Advanced Axe Infantry enters the fray, Hector begins to break down, as he can only be a level 20 base unit at max when they arrive. On average, Hawkeye will boast better or equal stats all around minus defense, with an A rank in axes, and Geitz on normal mode, while not having as strong stats as Hawkeye, along with Hector at level 20 being stronger in certain areas, his B rank in both axes and bows are rather advantageous, as well as gaining hard mode bonuses, which will put most of his numbers above Hector's. Once all of them have promoted and reached their level cap, Hector will be the overall best regarding stats only, as though he still suffers from having the lowest HP, it'll only be 2 points behind when taking into account hard mode Geitz. Strength will be 1 point lower than his cap and tied with Dorcas for second place, and the same applies to skill. Hector's speed should be the second best and significantly higher than what Dorcas and Barter have to offer, yet 6 point lower than Dart's. Luck is the second worst, his defense is huge at 28, his res is the second best of the bunch. Hector may end up with the best stats spread by the end, however he caps, but despite Hector having the highest defense threshold, his speed, skill and res are the lowest. Ultimately, this doesn't matter too much, as it is highly unlikely for any of these axe users to reach their caps aside from HP and strength on average, and heck, it's rare for any units to be level 20 by the final chapters of Blazing Sword minus Athos, promoted unit in the game, and only on Limb mode would I ever consider Dorcas to be a better choice due to availability. Hector's lock promotion, even at its earliest, will cause him to quickly fall short of Hawkeye and Galswin to an extent, since lasers are better than swords, any paladin and especially Marcus. However, his early game effectiveness should not be dismissed, and Hector hard mode is where I personally find him to shine the most, despite the strenuous fall off thanks to being such an effective shield in the early game. If Hector happens to get RNG blessed in Best Lord and Blazing Sword, but compared to the entire ensemble, I claim him to be just okay. Need to be an exceptional boss killer and possibly the best tank of the team for a while. His ice wolf replaced the Heaven Seal with a rock that has the word "fuck you" inscribed on it. Hector's lack of utility after the halfway point becomes blatantly apparent, and for serious players or ranked runs, Hector may not be the best choice. It can be a ton of fun to deploy, as it's here where his nickname of Hector the Rector comes out in full force, for his axe does not discriminate.
I'll notify your next of kin that you sucked!
Hector's nickname of The Rector had been a defining part, as Hector was fortunate enough to be part of the initial lineup, as well as one of, if not the best first generation units in Heroes. The reason for standard Hector to be placed at the bottom of the pile is primarily due to having a base stat total of 168, which is his lowest total sum and a rather minimal amount for an armor unit. As being said, his stat distribution is ideal for his class, as HP and defense are his greatest figures, having the third highest base HP in the entire game, only losing to Arden and Zephyr, with an attack stat only 1 point behind his monstrous defense. However, speed and especially res are lacking, which to be honest is fine considering he's an armor unit, making him an impressive wall against physical fighters, and even has the ability to threaten mages which are to act in a far more punishing manner towards those who engage him in combat. But if attack plus isn't available, then defense I speculate to be the next best thing, as his HP is already astronomical. A speed minus nature is favoured due to having vanilla skills and inherited ones that can work around his weakness, though strangely enough it has a super boon, allowing Hector's speed to reach 28, which is still unimpressive, as hard, preferably speed minus is the way to go. I additionally advise trying to keep resistance neutral, as it is too low to be worth having a boon, whereas with a Bane it makes Hector's magic weakness all the more crippling. When breaking down his base kit, Hector comes equipped with the legendary axe Armad, which is an incredible tool that boasts 16 quicker special activation, making the lack of being able to follow up attack a bit of a non-issue. His additional however, what makes Hector a standout axe and armor unit in this game is his A slot skill, Distant Counter, an ability that allows the user to attack ranged opponents with a melee weapon, providing Hector with the means to assist and B slot skill. So by default, Hector had turned to be rather strong, but can be made substantially better with skill inheritance, thanks to having access to 2 excellent weapons that can be utilised for a variety of builds. If Hector's HP starts to dwindle or he wants to support his teammates. Plus it can be used to reach and allow Hector to not only deal huge amounts of damage, but rarely worry about going below 80% HP indefinitely as build. Plus the Berserk Armad specifically can put Astra and Gale Force to much better use, all of which I recommend have to be put to much better use in a seal slot if possible. For example, Death Blow can optimize Hector's attack stat and at the cost of less coverage, so user discretion is advised, but in general, please stick to Distant Counter at all times, which many unfortunately do these days, at the cost of not doubling, even with Armad equipped. All is not lost though, but aren't a priority in my opinion, and instead should be equipped to an ally if possible. Plus Quick Repose Free comes in handy when paired with the likes of Bonfire and Ignis, where a neutral defense Ivy Hector can deal an additional 38 or 49 points of damage respectively, which can make even his biggest counters sweat profusely. The majority of Hector's C skills I don't evaluate to be as impressive as what can be achieved with the previous 2 slots, but they are thankfully highly interchangeable. Sticking to gold or ward armor is great, but only if the team is running an armor. In a vast number of instances, Panic Ploy Free is heavily recommended, as it can be activated frequently thanks to Hector's guard stats depending on the turn, but they are by nature circumstantial. Threatened skills, primarily attack and defense, can Ophelia, Valentine's Lynn and Ishtar as standalones do not have the strength to take him down, cause Hector a considerable amount of trouble, and he will definitely fall victim to the high tiers in each alignment, such as Fallen Tiki, Brave Micaiah, Winter Sophis, Legendary Arm, Adrift Female Corin, his own ult, etc. Luin in particular can decimate Hector before he can so much as blink unless a wary fighter is by his side.
Oh no!
Staff users aren't much to worry about either unless they happen to be using Dazzling and or Raffle Staff, which will make Hector a sitting duck, especially against the likes of Bride Fiorm, along with Brave Veronica and Camilla, who can do not get carried away however, as Hector is very much susceptible to foes in possession of an armor breaker weapon, and any rather powerful mages, but they too must be wary of Hector's raw strength, as Julius, Summer Leo and even assortment of Hector's hard counters. In particular, Christmas Varger can sponge Hector's attacks and retaliate full force if Hector initiates. New Year's Micaiah will one-shot him no problem, Eden can reduce him to dust, Radiant Ike can deal tons of damage and regain some lost HP, and he'll have a hard time facing off against red armor such as a textbook example of a stalemate. Somebody do something! Possibly Hector's biggest concern comes in the form of Zelgius / the Black Knight, who can outdamage, outspeed and outlast Hector, plus his special attack Black instead, but by all means feel free to work up Hector's versatility and experiment a lot. 1 year lump sum that is matched by the likes of Sophis, Amelia and Valbar. Valentine's Hector possesses less HP and speed than normal, but is stronger than the 3 remaining stats, to the point where he has the 5th best defense stat in the game, which is the highest of all his forms and on the same level as the likes of Halloween Mirth and Travant, while still retaining very high attack and the overall 6th highest HP alongside Draug, Effie, and the reason I don't play Aether Raids in minus nature, which pretty much applies to all his forms, as its shortcomings can be easily worked around. And as for the last two stats, they should ideally remain neutral, though if you happen to get a minus HP nature Hector, you can work this to your advantage, as it'll be easier to reach the threshold needed for Berserk Armad to fully awaken, but in general I'd recommend trying to fish for minus speed instead. Speaking of which, Berserk Armad is now Hector's default weapon that cannot be upgraded into another form, and all things considered, it is an excellent choice as this Valentine's variant also has the specials Night Sky and Glimmer ready from the get-go, which can be activated extremely easily and rather powerful given Hector's impressive attack stat, despite being Valentine's themed Wary Fighter. This encounter speaks for itself, and Wary Fighter can be very helpful at negating Hector's speed issues. In fact, don't be surprised if Hector doesn't require a follow-up attack to finish off his foes. However, since this version can't choose between normal and Berserk Armad, the Wary Fighter quick riposte trick will not work.
This sucks!
Glimmer is still perfectly viable for consistent special attacks, same with Moonbow, and Aether can allow for significant longevity at the risk of inconsistency regarding Armad's built-in Wrath attribute. Astra and Galeforce are also viable, along with Dragonfang / Draconic Aura because of the plus attack IVs, but given Hector's disgusting defense, Bonfire and Ignis are my preferred picks. Swap and Pivot reclaim their title of the best choices for Hector's assist skill slot, though Reciprocal Aid can be useful for purposely lowering these too, but I would personally pick the former. Something that is going to remain consistent throughout Hector's forms is that Distinct, which works in tandem with Berserk Armads for maximum power. The likes of Deathblow, Bond, Boost, assist with special triggers, not to mention Fury can be a very risk versus reward strategy given the properties of Berserk Armads. Since this B slot comes with Wary Fighter, which is still useful for those wishing to play things a bit more safe, I would personally select the other ARM exclusive fighter skills to assist with the special triggers and Hector's lack of speed. Out of the two, Vengeful Fighter capitalizes on Hector's defense, but Bold Fighter works great for his attack plus IVs, and either way, both skills are sublime, so pick and choose really. By applying Wrath Free and doubling up on its effects, this will amount to very fast special triggers in conjunction with a whopping plus 20 damage, which means that Ignis can deal an extra 52 damage from a neutral IV defense Hector Desperation attack. Additionally, the Link skills can apply nice buffs given the likelihood of using Swap or Pivot, but one that Hector favored also works here, like Panic Ploy, Armor March and Ward / Goad Armor, along with the home player may find useful along with the staples like Armor Boot and Quicken Pulse, are more than welcome to be put to use. Despite the lack of versatility, a lot of Hector's matchups regarding one-on-one vanilla battles haven't changed, only now. In fact, if we compare just base builds with neutral IVs and no assistance on both sides, no single blue mage can defeat him because that's fair. Many green units suffer the same fate, as not even the likes of Barter and Shush, with their armor killer weapons, can one-round Hector upon engaging him first, unless they too activate special triggers or receive many buffs. If that wasn't enough, previous counters like Edelgard, Winter Sophist and Female Kana are no longer a huge threat, with only the best of the best axe users able to go toe-to-toe with Hector down and survive his counterattack, with Fly and Nino no longer able to just about scrape by, and Lewin unable to follow up instantly, though Brave Makai continues to be a serious threat, as well as Flyer Reinhardt who can automatically double despite Wary Fighter, so don't get too reckless.
You have got to be kidding!
Colourless units will commonly fall before the Ostian General, as most if not all bow and dagger users amount to nothing, which now extends to Kinshi Hinoka, Legendary Arm, and even beast foes like Fallen Korin to a lesser extent. Unfortunately, unable to follow up can still safely engage him and debuff his stats, so be careful around enemy medics. Beast unit is defense and attack, along with Wary Fighter making the often high speed irrelevant, as not even Karla and Sword catch, and a lot of his setups attributing considerable risk due to often requiring Hector to retaliate rather than engage. The reward for pulling them off is priceless, as Valentine's Hector does essentially everything the original. They're just here to die. With the release of Book 2, many new additions were added to the game, one of them being Legendary Heroes, which is what Hector's second ult took the form of, that comes with a Fire Blessing, and was in fact the fifth one introduced into the game after Fjorm, Robin, Lyn, and Ryoma. Once again, Hector is an armor unit that wields an axe because he literally is attached to the damn thing, and unsurprisingly, remains a fantastic armor and axe unit, being on par with the Valentine's variant. Though this time around, I observed his success to be large, that total of 174. In fact, until Halloween Hector arrived, Legendary Hector had the highest attack style out of all the versions of the Axe Lord. On the subject of attack, as you probably guessed, it is the ideal boon to maximize handsively. Having defense plus helps to even out his bulk, where it will be 1 point higher than his neutral attack stat. HP and resistance remaining neutral are a safe option, as speed continues to be unsalvageable, especially as Hector has a Sudanishi's Thunder Armad, which retains the same base damage but grants defense plus 3, along with the ability in which if the number of allies within 2 spaces exceeds the number of foes within 2 spaces, not counting the user and the target, then Hector's opponent cannot make a follow-up attack. With Armads by his side, Legendary Hector is extremely deadly in the speed check kicking in which Hector will almost always lose to. Hector still has special skills on his side, which now consists of Draconic Aura, which boosts damage dealt by 30% of the unit's attack stat. So even with neutral IVs, Hector can deal an extra 12 damage, and in some cases, that's all he needs. The A skill slot is to no one's surprise, Distant Counter, but at this point I wouldn't have it any other way. Skill to the table in the form of Ostian Pulse, which at the beginning of turn 1 grants special cooldown -1 to all certain beast units can profit from the Marquess. When observing his standard setup, Legendary Hector from my perspective has the best predetermined skill set of all his forms currently featured in this video, primarily thanks to Vengeful Fighter being available from the get-go, along with other staples like Distant Counter and Armad, but as always, there are other ways for Hector to apply himself. The notion of Armads being exchanged for another weapon is something I still refuse to advocate, and due to his reliance on team members, swap and pivot are far more essential than before, or just rally skills to help out fellow comrades is perfectly fine as well. When addressing his special triggers, Draconic Aura functions as a decent placeholder, and at the cost of extra cooldown, Dragon Fang increases this bonus from 30% to 50% of the unit's attack, which means an extra 20 damage with neutral IVs and 22 with plus IVs. Glimmer and Moonbow function as solid substitutes due to their low activation rate, in conjunction with are still mediated to be the best special moves for Hector. Bonfire specifically, as it has the same cooldown as Draconic Aura, but will deal more damage due to using a higher percentage of Hector's designated stat, even with an attack plus nature, so I would personally endorse the acquisition of Bonfire unless you are running a team that grants significant attacks. His allies should, in most circumstances, be the one providing the bonuses, so he can focus on taking the hits and deal skills, Death Blow, Heavy Blade, both close and preferably distant defense, and Fierce Breath for him to reach the 75% or lower requirement. Slicing into the C section, designated to other armor units within the team if possible. This applies to the Hone, Spur, Tactics that work well here, with Distant Defense becoming a popular pick given his better than normal resistance stat. Though if the player is running Bold Fighter, then Quick Riposte is an excellent choice to allow otherwise continuous follow-up attacks touched. However, since Hector is banking heavily on team synergy, he has to deal with much more counters when applying standalone engagements, but by contrast can fare astronomically better against them when being supported by his allies and survive an encounter with Hector, and even then they'll just barely make it out alive. Colourless units tend to suffer armor, and though Brave Fuel and Brave Camilla can defeat him, Hector is now finally able to stand up to a double attack. A variety of physical threats from green and red units are a cause for concern, especially if they have skills that bypass Thunder Armads, as both forms of Marita and Byleth, Edelgard, Female Kana and Blazing Knight Eliwood, fucking plagiarist, can give him a very hard time. Without team members by his side, Hector cannot make use of his build too much for him when facing them alone, but on the bright side, now green magic users aren't as big of a threat, thanks to higher resistance and attack, as green Reinhardt just barely misses out from defeating him, and the likes of Henry, Thrasis, and Queen Celica can just barely take him down one-on-one, so I feel only the extremely powerful magic users like Lewin and Micaiah remain a thorn in Hector's side. On his own, Legendary Hector are capitalizing on his strengths. Legendary Hector definitely requires a more strategic state of mind to make the best use out of, the case for 3 separate occasions. Hector remains an armor unit and one of the best in the game, but designed best defense and highest resistance of them all, making him, from what I can deduce, not as potent as previously regarding pure to give him the best chance possible against mages. While this is perfectly fine, I feel that resistance should be neutral alongside Hector remains an armor unit, he's never going to win a foot race. And luckily he doesn't have to, since access to arguably his best special triggers, Glowing Ember and Ignis straight out of the gate, further complemented by Maltet's special cooldown ability. As far as passive properties go, instead of Distant Counter, Hector now increases Hector's resistance by 6 during even-numbered turns, resulting in a 50-50 ability figuratively and literally speaking, but in the context of Hector's build, I'd argue that it is well suited to him. Brave Hector I can't help but notice to be designed as a defensive unit, and due to this rendition hosting the highest risk, any other A skill that Hector can effectively utilize should be assigned to the seal slot if possible. Steady Breath, send HP with or without the help of Armor March, plus if the player is running Wary Fighter, then I feel Quick Riposte is a must. Quick Impulse can also be used to further decrease special cooldown count, which works wonders for the highest cost get-go. Brave Hector is an incredibly potent unit against a large majority of the roster, as now he is easily able to deal. Hector does not have to worry about getting doubled or attacked by special triggers from red units unless they have access to light and situation. Plus Halloween Hector once again shows that the only way to beat Hector is with Hector. This units mean little to Hector. Even Hinoka stands no chance most of the time, but the likes of Legendary Arm, careless. Moving on to green units is where Hector begins to struggle. As though he can take a few hits from Axe and Beast, he fights alongside his little Alina, who is dressed like a kitten. I swear I'm gonna have a heart attack, she's so cute! Through this Halloween event, Hector has become even stronger, which I didn't even believe to be possible. For now he is ranked with the lowest HP of the 5, but in turn has the highest speed, second best resistance and defense, along with the best attack like Scythia, Keaton and Halloween Dorcas. Attack Plus is certainly the top contender for IVs to bless Hector with, that is augmented with a super boon pushing it all the way to 45 points. But if that's not possible, then defense is the next best option, as it remains one of Hector's highest stats. HP and res as Hector continues to have a solution to this persistent plight. It certainly took a while, but Hector seems to remember that he could swing a sword. To be fair, I wouldn't want to remember using a sword in FE7. Becoming the corresponding unit type who wields the Conjurer Curios, that happens to accommodate the same base damage as Armad and Maltet, while being simultaneously super effective against armor units, which gives the new meaning to the phrase fight fire with fire. This weapon additional 4 points to all stats minus HP if it is an odd number turn, or the enemy has less than full health. With this in mind, unlike Brave Hector, the Halloween version is leaning more towards offense as this odd turn gimmick carries over to his passive skills. In terms of special triggers, Bonfire remains at his disposal, though this time instead of Ignis, he has Glowing Ember, which does the exact same thing as Bonfire but has a cooldown count of 4 instead of 3, and it goes without saying that you're better off waiting less time for Bonfire or dealing more damage with Ignis, so try to replace Glowing Ember as quickly as possible. Hector would not be Hector if he were to come forth for an assist skill, because he doesn't. Yet he still won't give up distant counter, though you won't get any complaints from me. However, the Beast's guaranteed follow-up attack and prevent the foe from making a follow-up attack on odd numbered turns. The nature of the skill is solely situational, but it does allow Hector to be astronomically dangerous on the corresponding turn. And finally, in his C slot, he has the Hone attack skills which can be upgraded into Hone armor, and overall Halloween and Alina also have the special ability to activate a duo skill once per map, which in this case allows the pair to. Since he is quite new, research was rather up in the air regarding definitive answers, but the majority of factors that complemented all previous iterations are applicable here. Conjurer Curios is a highly valuable weapon at its attack stat with plus nature IVs. Also, Safeguard / Barrier Blade Plus can grant Hector extra bulk when being attacked at all times, but generally I'd say stick to the Conjurer. Swap and Pivot aren't moving from there as both Bonfire and Ignis are still exceptional attacks, but given the lack of special cooldown abilities at base, I would suggest Bonfire over Ignis in this particular instance. Glimmer and Moonbow make for splendid specials as they are quick to activate and pair well with Hector's already incredible attack, which can also be applied to Draconic Aura and Dragon Fang, but Bonfire and Ignis do their job and better unless you have a plus attack minus defense Hector, though that comes with his own set of problems. There is also Astra, Aether, and Gale Force, but those I would only recommend if you happen to be running the fighter skills or Quicken Pulse for extra cooldown. You all know by now how important it is to hold Death Blow, the Brazen skills, and Heavy Blade are all fine factors to complement Hector. These skills are where it gets interesting because Odd for Op is a great skill, but only during odd numbered turns, which is why generally Vengeful or Bold Fighter are perceived to be superior choices as it gives Hector more freedom to follow up attack in concurrence with increasing special cooldown. Link skills are also good considering how frequently Hector will be using the likes of Pivot and Swap in order to correctly position himself, along with Quick Riposte acting as a good way enough to challenge him, with his speed and lack of resistance being a constant handicap that he is thankfully able to work around, and boss killers from my perspective, and has enough going for him to prevent me from pronouncing him as a bad unit. Fire Emblem Heroes has shown extensive favoritism towards Hector, as each of his appearances have become some of the best units within their respective fields, and the entire game, having excellent stat spreads, weapons, and in some cases, the ability to dominate roughly 2/3 of the entire cast no matter the form is an impressive feat, and Hector I proclaim to act as an essential part of any armor team or those looking for a physical tank who can absolutely wreck shit. And that concludes another episode of Battle Breakdown. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and please let me know what you thought in the comments, as well as which character you'd like to see me tackle next time. And it doesn't just have to be the Lords, as this series can feature any playable unit from the main series and heroes. Please be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to stay 3 to 4 times a week on average. And don't forget to check out my Patreon, where you can get exclusive info on upcoming videos, along with other benefits and perks. And on the subject of Patreon, I'd like to say a very big thank you to all the patrons who help support this channel. Sorry that this video took so long, but I really do appreciate all the love and support from all of you. I could thank you to Chaos Sabereye, Justin Konovich, Leafy94, Lucina21, Midnight Castle, Patanka Fan 32, Maggie Fall, Vincent Clark, Jeremy